The word came out low, not shouted, not performed, just dropped into the middle of that warm, well-lit dining room like a stone through glass. Apologize, right now. I remember the exact moment it happened. Walter, that's what everyone called him, Uncle Walt, the family patriarch, 81 years old, ramrod straight even in a dinner chair, had his wine glass halfway to his mouth. And then he stopped. Set it down. Slow and deliberate, the way a man sets something down when his hands have gone very still on purpose. His eyes found mine across the table. And I knew, before he said another word, that he recognized something. Not me, the name. Ryan laughed first. My brother-in-law, the groom's older brother, technically, the one who'd been running the dinner conversation like it was a performance he'd rehearsed. Not a cruel laugh, just a dismissive one, the kind men use when they want to shrink something without appearing to try. Come on, Uncle Walt, he said, already reaching for his bread roll. It's just a call sign. That's when I understood. The evening as I'd hoped it might go, quiet, unremarkable, just a woman showing up to a pre-wedding dinner and disappearing into the background, that version was already gone. Something else was beginning. I almost didn't come. That part matters. People assume I'm decisive because of how I carry myself, the posture, the economy of movement, the way I don't fill silence with noise. They think I've always been that way. They're wrong. I've just had to practice it longer than most. I sat in my rental car outside the house in Annapolis, Maryland for 11 minutes. I know it was 11 because I watched the clock on the dash the way I used to watch timers during operations. Counting down, waiting for myself to be ready. The neighborhood was the kind that had been expensive for 40 years and knew it. Stone driveways, crepe myrtle trees trimmed to perfect ovals, a Chesapeake Bay sunset doing its best work behind the rooflines. Inside, warm amber light glowed through the front windows, and I could already see shapes moving, hear the muffled suggestion of voices and laughter. I checked myself in the mirror. Blouse, hair down, small gold earrings, no rank, no unit patch, no name tape. Just a woman going to dinner. I said it out loud, actually, just dinner. I've talked myself into harder things. Carol, my sister, the bride-to-be, genuinely the best person I know, met me at the door before I could knock. She threw her arms around me with the kind of force that suggested she'd been watching for headlights. You came, she said into my shoulder. Said I would. She pulled back and looked at me the way only a younger sister can, like she was checking for damage. She wasn't sure she had the vocabulary to name. You okay? I'm always okay. She knew that wasn't an answer. She also knew me well enough not to push it at the door. Inside, the house smelled like garlic butter and old wood, and the specific floral arrangement Carol had described to me in a 40-minute phone call 2 weeks ago. The kind of home that had been lived in long enough to develop its own atmosphere, framed sailing photos, military portraits going back generations, a grandfather clock in the hallway ticking like it had opinions. The Hargrove family, Carol's future in-laws, old money, old name, old Maryland, they'd been welcoming enough on the phone, in texts, through Carol's second-hand accounts, but rooms tell you things that texts don't. I took stock of the gathering the way I always do. Old habit, not paranoia, just attention. 16, maybe 18 people. A mix of ages. The older generation clustered near the fireplace. The younger ones drifting between the kitchen island and the back porch where someone had set up a bar cart. Voices overlapping, comfortable, easy. The sound of people who'd been in rooms together long enough to stop performing for each other. Nobody noticed me come in. That was fine, preferred actually. Carol steered me through introductions I wouldn't remember, names and relationships blurring together the way they do when you're running on social reserve rather than genuine ease. I smiled when it was appropriate. Shook hands firmly. Said the right things in the right order. After enough years in environments where reading a room correctly is the difference between mission success and catastrophe, civilian social navigation feels almost easy. Almost. Ryan found me before I found him. He materialized at my elbow the way confident men do at parties, not quite interrupting, but not quite waiting either, occupying space with the assumption that his presence was welcome. So you're Evelyn, he said it like a conclusion he'd already reached. Eve, I said, just Eve. He smiled, younger than I expected, mid-40s maybe, with the build of someone who'd played lacrosse in college and kept going to the gym out of stubbornness ever since. Comfortable in his own skin. The kind of man who'd never had a reason not to be. Carol talks about you constantly, he said. The Navy thing, very mysterious. Not really. He tilted his head. She never says what you actually did. Because I never told her. He laughed like that was a punchline. I hadn't meant it as one. I'm Ryan, he said, in case she forgot to mention me. She mentioned you. He waited for more. I didn't give it. His smile stayed put, but something shifted slightly behind his eyes. The smallest recalibration. I'd seen it before, the moment when someone realizes their usual social levers aren't going to work, and they're not quite sure what to do about it. Well, he said, raising his glass in a small salute. Welcome to the family, or almost. Almost, I agreed. He drifted back toward his orbit. And I found mine, a chair near the end of the room, a glass of water, and the reliable cover of listening. Dinner was called at 7. Long rectangular table, candlelight, the kind of place settings that communicate effort. I found my seat near the middle, strategic enough to observe, anonymous enough to avoid becoming the focal point of anything. Across from me sat Walter Hargrove. I'd heard about him from Carol. Former Navy captain, Vietnam veteran, the family's moral center of gravity, she'd said, the person whose approval meant something. He'd served 2 tours, come home, built a career in maritime law, raised 3 children, buried his wife 6 years ago, and now sat at every family dinner with the particular stillness of a man who had outlived enough noise to know it wasn't worth adding to. He looked at me once when I sat down. Brief, measured, not unfriendly, the look of someone doing their own quiet assessment. I understood that language. I gave him a small nod. He returned it. We'd communicated something without a word. Carol, sitting 3 seats down, caught it and smiled at her plate. The dinner conversation moved the way these things do, effortlessly for the people native to it, requiring mild translation for everyone else. Upcoming wedding logistics. A nephew's new job in DC, something about a sailboat that needed repairs. The kind of conversation that stitches a family together in real time, the ongoing narrative of people who show up for each other. I ate, I listened, I offered when asked, I didn't volunteer. For a while, it was just dinner. Then Ryan set down his fork. It wasn't a dramatic gesture, but something in the shift of his weight, the way he leaned back with that particular ease of a man about to take up more room, put me on alert the same way a change in wind puts a ship on alert. Subtle, instinctive. So Eve, he said, and his voice carried just enough to quiet the immediate conversation around him. Carol tells me you were special operations. I took a sip of water. That's one way to say it. What's another way? Complicated. He smiled. The room had half-tuned in now. Not maliciously, just the natural magnetism of something that might become interesting. Navy SEAL, someone asked from down the table. Young. Caleb, I thought Ryan's son, maybe 22, college energy, video game-shaped understanding of military service. Women can't be SEALs, Ryan said, not unkindly, just correcting. That's not accurate, I said quietly. A brief pause. Since when? He asked. 2015. He processed that, well, either way. He looked back at me. Special operations sounds like it comes with a good story. Most things do, I said, if you tell them right. He smiled wider. The room was listening now, more openly. Carol was watching me with the careful expression of someone who loves you and is not quite sure whether to be proud or worried. Come on, Ryan said. You're going to be family. What did they call you out there? And there it was. The question that sounds like small talk, the one with teeth under it. I looked at him for a moment, considered my exits, chose honesty, the way I almost always do when the other options feel like shrinking. Shepherd, I said. The room held for a beat. Ryan's smile stayed, but his eyes did that recalculating thing again. Shepherd, he repeated. That's not very scary. I wasn't trying to scare anyone. Come on, he said with a little laugh now. That can't be the real one. I set my fork down. Ghost, I said. He raised an eyebrow. Better, but I still feel like you're warming up to something. Carol's hand under the table would have been on her napkin. I know her tells. It doesn't matter, I said. Of course it does, Ryan said. These things always mean something. What was the actual one, the one people used? The candlelight was very steady. Outside, a boat horn sounded once on the water, distant, low. I looked at him evenly. Reckoning, I said. The word landed differently than everything before it. Not because it was dramatic, because it was true, and people can feel the difference, even people who don't know why. Ryan opened his mouth to make another joke. Hey. E didn't get there. Apologize, right now. Walter's voice, quiet as a depth charge. Every head turned. The old man hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't moved dramatically. He had simply spoken with the kind of absolute authority that doesn't need volume, the authority of a man who has given orders in situations where the wrong word costs lives, and whose body still remembers how to carry that. Ryan blinked. Uncle Walt. You heard me. Walter's eyes hadn't left mine. Apologize to this woman. The room had gone completely still. The kind of still that happens when something real enters a space built for the comfortable and managed. Ryan let out a short, uncertain laugh. I was just asking about her call scene. You were performing, Walter said. There's a difference, and somewhere in you, you know it. The laughter died. I should say clearly, I didn't need it. The defense, the intervention. After everything I'd navigated in my career, the bureaucratic walls, the skepticism, the constant quiet requirement to prove, reprove, and prove again, a brother-in-law at a dinner table asking pushy questions barely registered on the scale of things I'd survived. But Walter wasn't doing it because I needed saving. He was doing it because it was right, and that's a different thing entirely. Ryan's face had gone through several expressions in rapid succession, amusement, confusion, defensiveness, and had landed somewhere new, somewhere younger, like a layer of confident adult had been peeled back to reveal something less certain underneath. I didn't mean any disrespect, he said. What you mean and what you do are two separate conversations, Walter replied. Right now I'm interested in the second one. Carol's fiancé, Thomas, quiet, steady Thomas, who I'd decided I liked within 5 minutes of meeting him, reached for his water glass and stared at the table with the focused attention of a man staying precisely out of it. Ryan looked at me. I looked back at him. He didn't have the vocabulary yet to understand exactly what he'd done wrong. I could see that. He wasn't a bad man. I'd read enough of those to know the difference. He was an incurious one, a man so accustomed to rooms organizing themselves around him that he'd never developed the instinct to ask what someone else might be carrying. I'm sorry, he said, and then to his credit he said it again less automatically. Eve, I'm sorry, I pushed where I shouldn't have. I held his gaze for a moment. Then I nodded. Thank you, I said. Walter picked up his wine glass. The room exhaled. It didn't go back to what it had been. It rarely does after a moment like that. The surface repairs itself, conversation resumes, plates get passed, someone makes a joke that lands softly and gives everyone permission to breathe. But underneath, the chemistry has changed. You can feel it, something cleared, something rearranged. Plates moved around the table. Carol refilled glasses. Thomas said something that made his mother laugh, and the sound broke the last of the tension like a window being opened. Walter looked at me across the candles. Reckoning, he said, quietly enough that it was just for us. I nodded once. His expression shifted in a way I recognized from only a handful of people I'd ever met. Not awe, not admiration, something older than both. The recognition of a man who had lived close enough to real things to know their shape when he sees them. I served with a man, he said slowly, who mentioned that name, about 9 years ago. a charity event for Gold Star families. He said it carefully, the way you say something when you want the right people to hear it and the wrong people to miss it. I kept my face still. He said it described someone who went back, Walter continued. When going back wasn't ordered, when going back wasn't even smart. He paused. He said it with the kind of quiet that men use when they're trying to do something justice they know words can't quite reach. I looked down at my plate for a moment. He didn't have the details wrong, I said finally. Walter nodded slowly, like that confirmed something he'd hoped was true. Ryan, who had been listening from 3 seats down, with an expression that had moved well past defensiveness into something more honest, leaned forward slightly. What happened? He asked, not challenging, not performing, just asking. And I understood something had changed in him too. I didn't want to tell it. That's the honest truth. I've never wanted to tell it, not because I'm ashamed, not because it's classified beyond what I can share in a civilian dining room, but because every time the story leaves my mouth it stops belonging to me. It becomes something people carry differently than I do. Lighter, usually, more cinematic, stripped of the weight that I know is actually attached to it. But some rooms earn the truth. And this one, somehow, through friction and discomfort, and one old man's unflinching sense of awe. T was right, had become that kind of room. So I told it. Not all of it, you never tell all of it, but enough. We were operating in a region I won't name, I said. Intel suggested a small group of aid workers, Americans, one Canadian, had been taken and were being held in a compound that, on paper, looked manageable. Small footprint, limited resistance, 2-hour window. The table was very quiet. On paper, Ryan said. On paper, I agreed. The reality was different on every axis that mattered. More personnel inside, compromised entry point. 2 of our team took fire in the first 90 seconds. I paused. We extracted, command decision. The right call given what we knew and what we had. Carol's hand was flat on the tablecloth. But you left them there, Thomas said carefully. Not accusatory, just following the thread. We left them there, I said, yes. I took a breath. There's a version of the story where I tell you I couldn't sleep, where I lay awake and had some kind of revelation. That version is cleaner and it isn't true. I looked around the table. The truth is simpler and harder. I thought about those people, their faces, the information we had on them, what they'd signed up for and what they hadn't. And I understood that I was the one person in the immediate situation who had the specific skill set, the specific knowledge of the compound layout, and the specific, I'll call it tolerance for low probability outcomes, to attempt a re-entry. Alone, Walter said. Alone. Ryan shook his head slowly, not in disbelief, in something closer to vertigo. I'm not going to dress it up as brave, I said. I've been in enough dark spaces to know that bravery and stubbornness can look identical from the outside. What I'll tell you is that I made a decision with full knowledge of what it could cost. And then I went. And, Caleb, the young one from down the table. And it worked, I said, not cleanly, not without cost, but the people inside came out. The candles had burned lower. The room felt smaller than it had an hour ago, not claustrophobic, just close. Intimate in the way that shared truth makes things intimate. Reckoning, Walter said again very softly. Someone started using it in communications, I said. Not me, I didn't pick it. But by the time I heard it, it had already stuck. He nodded slowly. That's how the real ones work, he said. They're not given, they're assigned, by people who saw something and needed a word for it. Ryan was staring at his wine glass. His expression had the quality of a man taking inventory, going back through the evening, through his own words and gestures, measuring them against what he now knew they'd landed against. I made you perform, he said quietly. It wasn't a question. A little, I said. He winced. I'm sorry. I mean it this time, not just because Walt told me to. I looked at him. There's a particular kind of apology that comes after a person has genuinely recalibrated. It doesn't have the smooth edges of social reflex. It's rougher, slower, slightly uncomfortable, because the person saying it is still in the middle of understanding what they're sorry for. That's the real kind. That's the one that matters. I know, I said. Walter looked between us. Then he did something I didn't expect. He smiled, small, private, the smile of a man who's lived long enough to find genuine hope in a changed mind. Good, he said simply, and reached for his wine. Dessert arrived. Peach cobbler, still warm, the kind that smells like someone's grandmother had strong opinions about butter. Carol served it herself, moving around the table with the quiet efficiency of a woman managing something she loves. When she set mine down, she squeezed my shoulder once. Didn't say anything, didn't need to. Conversation resumed its natural tide. Easier now, looser, unguarded in a way it hadn't been before the friction of the evening cleared the air. Caleb asked Walter about Vietnam, and the old man answered the way veterans of his generation answer. Directly, without mythology, leaving in the inconvenient parts that made the story true. I listened and ate my cobbler. Sometime around 9, Ryan came and sat in the empty chair beside me. He set his coffee mug down and looked at it for a moment before speaking. Can I ask you something? You've been doing that all night, I said. He laughed genuinely this time, no performance in it. Yeah, I noticed. He paused. This one's different though. Go ahead. What's it like? He asked. Coming back, not from the deployment, from all of it, from being that person and then sitting at a table like this one. I considered the question. It was, actually, the most perceptive thing he'd asked all night. It's like wearing clothes that almost fit, I said. Most of the time they're fine, comfortable even, and then you move a certain way and you feel exactly where the seam is. He nodded slowly, like that landed somewhere accurate. Eh? Does it get better? Different, I said. Not better or worse, just different. You rebuild your sense of normal from scratch and the new version has more room in it for things like this. I gestured small, meaning the table, the room, all of it. Dinners, awkward conversations. People who mean well but miss the mark. He was quiet for a moment. I miss the mark a lot, he admitted. You corrected, I said. That's what matters. He looked at me. Walt always says that the second move defines you more than the first. Walter's right about most things, I suspect. Ryan smiled. Don't tell him that, he already knows. We sat there for a moment, drinking our coffee, listening to the room around us, multiple conversations overlapping, laughter rising and falling, Thomas telling some story that had his mother covering her mouth. The specific, unrepeatable sound of people who are becoming family. Thank you, Ryan said finally, for not shutting the door. You gave me a reason to leave it open, I said. Around 10, I stepped outside. The porch faced the water, a narrow strip of the Chesapeake visible between the houses across the street, silver-black under the moon. Cool air, salt in it. The kind of night that makes the world feel like it's been rinsed clean. I stood at the railing and let my lungs expand all the way for the first time since I'd arrived. The door opened behind me. I didn't turn, I already knew his step. Walter came to stand beside me. He moved with the deliberate care of a man who respects his own body's limits without being humbled by them. He looked out at the water. We stood that way for a minute, maybe more. You handled yourself well in there, he said. I didn't handle anything, I said. It just happened. That's what good handling looks like from the inside, he said. I smiled at the water. Do you still feel it, I asked, after this many years? He was quiet for a moment. Some days more than others, he said. The thing nobody tells you about carrying something heavy for long enough is that you forget it's there, until you set it down for a moment, and then you feel the absence of the weight more than the weight itself. I turned that over. That's one of the more honest things I've heard, I said. He glanced at me. I'm 81, I can't afford to waste words anymore. We stood looking at the water. You reminded that room of something tonight, Walter said, whether you meant to or not. What's that? That the people at their table are more than what they've been introduced as. He paused. That's a valuable thing to learn. Most people go their whole lives eating dinner with strangers they think they know. I thought about Carol, about how she'd looked at me when I walked in, that complicated mix of relief and worry and love, about how she'd squeezed my shoulder over the cobbler without a word. I almost didn't come, I said. I know, Walter said. I looked at him. How? Because I've almost not come to things my whole life, he said. And I've learned to recognize the particular way people sit at tables when they're still deciding whether they should be there. He looked at me directly then. I'm glad you decided yes. I looked back at the water. So am I said. And I meant it completely. Morning came soft through the guest room curtains, light the color of the inside of a shell, warm and without urgency. I lay still for a moment before moving, listening to the house breathe around me, water running somewhere, a radio low in the kitchen, the gentle percussion of morning routine. I got dressed and went downstairs. Carol was at the stove, hair still loose, a mug held in both hands. She turned when she heard me. Hey, she said quietly. Hey. She looked at me the way she has since we were children, like she's checking to see who I brought with me today. What version of her sister walked through the door? You okay? She asked. Yeah, I said, actually yeah. She handed me a mug without being asked. I wrapped my hands around it and stood beside her the way we used to stand at the kitchen counter when we were girls, before the world got complicated. Last night, she started. Last night was fine, I said. It was more than fine, she said. It was, she searched for the word, real. Sometimes it is, I said. She leaned against the counter and looked at me. I didn't know, she said, about all of it, about how much. You weren't supposed to. I know, she paused. But I want to know more if you ever, whenever you want. I looked at my coffee. There are people in your life who love you from a distance because they sense, correctly, that you live in terrain they can't follow you into. And there are the rare ones who say, show me where you've been, not because they're unafraid, but because the relationship matters more than the fear. Carol has always been the second kind. Okay, I said, sometime, yeah. She smiled, the real one, the Carol SM. I'll unchanged since she was 7. Okay. Ryan came downstairs 20 minutes later, slightly sheepish in the way people are the morning after they've shown a worse version of themselves to someone they'll see again. He poured his coffee, stood for a moment, then looked at me. Morning, he said. Mornings. He nodded slowly. I've been thinking about what Uncle Walt said last year at Thanksgiving, he said. Something about how the measure of a person isn't who they are at their best, it's who they become after they've been their worst. Sounds like him, I said. Ryan held his mug with both hands. I was my worst last night. You were the version of yourself that hadn't been challenged yet, I said. It's different. He looked at me, is it? Yeah, I said, the first version gets replaced, the second one gets carried. He thought about that for a long moment. I'd like to not carry that one, he said. Then don't, I said simply. Last night's already done, this morning is what you've got now. He nodded once, slowly, like a man absorbing something he intended to actually use. Thomas appeared in the doorway, took one look at the room, decided everything was fine, and went straight for the coffee pot with the efficiency of a man who has chosen his priorities. I liked Thomas more by the second. Walter came down last. He moved through the kitchen with the same unhurried certainty he moved everywhere, pulling out his chair at the small breakfast table, unfolding his napkin, looking around at all of us with the quiet satisfaction of a man who woke up and found exactly what he expected. People he respected. He looked at me. Slept well, he asked. First time in a while, I said honestly. He nodded like that was the correct answer. Good houses do that. Carol set a plate in front of him. He thanked her in that specific way older men thank people when they genuinely mean it, not reflexively, but with eye contact, like the gratitude has weight. We ate breakfast together, all of us. The conversation was lighter than the night before, easy, meandering, the kind of morning talk that has no destination. Ryan made a terrible joke. Caleb came down looking like he'd slept for 11 hours and was proud of it. Thomas's mother appeared in a robe and immediately began reorganizing the muffin situation. Normal, ordinary, the specific unremarkable texture of family. I sat in the middle of it and let myself belong to it. I left around 11. Carol walked me to the car. She held on when she hugged me longer than a goodbye hug, the kind that's also saying come back, come back, come back. Wedding's in 6 weeks, she said. I'll be there, I said. I know, she pulled back, her eyes were a little bright. You better. Ryan was in the doorway. He raised his hand, not quite a wave, not quite a salute, something in between, something new. I raised mine back. Thomas gave me a genuine smile, the comfortable kind. Like we'd skipped 5 years of getting to know each other and ended up somewhere good. And Walter walked me the last few steps to the car. He stopped at the door and looked at me with those steady, clear eyes. You did something important last night, he said, even if you didn't intend to. I just answered some questions, I said. You showed them that the people across from them are worth the discomfort of really seeing, he said. That's not a small thing. Most people live their whole lives avoiding that. I opened the car door. Take care of yourself, he said. You've still got work to do in the world. I looked at him. So do you, I said. He smiled, full and warm and earned. I got in, started the engine. In the rearview mirror, Carol, Thomas, Ryan, Walter. 4 people standing in a November doorway. Different generations, different lives, different distances from the things that had been spoken the night before. But standing together. I pulled out of the driveway and drove toward the water and the highway beyond it. The Chesapeake stretched silver to my left, wide and unhurried, the kind of landscape that makes you feel like you have time. I thought about what Walter had said on the porch the night before, about the weight you forget you're carrying until you set it down. I thought about the guest room, the soft light, the first real sleep in longer than I wanted to count. I thought about Carol's saying, I want to know more, meaning it. I thought about Ryan's face at breakfast, the specific, effortful honesty of a man trying to be better than he was yesterday. I don't carry the call sign with pride. I never have. Reckoning is not a trophy, it's a receipt, proof of something that cost more than I'd budgeted for. A reminder every time I hear it, not just of what I did, but of what it meant and what it took and what was lost before I got there. But last night, in a dining room in Annapolis with Peach Cobbler and the Chesapeake a few streets away. That name opened a door I hadn't known I needed ope. Ned. And on the other side of it was a table I could come back to. That's not nothing. That's not nothing at all.